Hello and namaste. This is Adhikari. I'm the founder of the Great Nepali Diaspora, a community of global Nepali professionals, and this is TGNDB, Diaspora's Kurakani. Our podcast aims to showcase people with roots in Nepal and share their stories of struggle, perseverance, and success. My special guest today is Ambika Adhikary. Ambika Ji is a principal planner with the City of Tempe, Arizona, where he heads its long-range planning division. He has over 35 years of experience in urban and environmental planning and has international development experience in the US, Canada, Nepal, Mexico, Fiji, and Kenya. He is a distinguished adjunct fellow at the Institute of Integrated Development Studies, or IIDS, in Nepal. He obtained his Doctor of Design degree from Harvard University and Master of Architecture from the University of Hawaii. He has authored one book and co-edited 6 books and has been published widely in journals and newspapers. Ambika Ji has a stellar experience. He is somebody that I admire greatly, and I'm super excited to welcome him. Welcome, Ambika Ji.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that warm introduction. Now I have to live up to that. Thank you.
You are, amazing, Ambika Ji. I have to tell you, there's so much that I want to explore. The first time once I heard about you, it was really, really interesting. So I want, our audience, whether they're, in the US or Nepal or around the world, to get to know you a little better. त्यसको लागि चाहिँ let's sort of start from the beginning in terms of हजुरको childhood and youth in Nepal. Tell us a little bit more about your life back in Nepal, and if you have any special memories from that time.
Sure, Preeti. First of all, once again, thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure, and especially having seen your work, and you've initiated a very interesting program and concept and organization called the Great Nepali Diaspora. The diaspora activities, diaspora programs, diaspora academia is of some big interest to me for a long time. So I'm very happy to be in your program. So let's go back to some of my childhood memories and some of my initial kind of steps. It's been a long time, I'm kind of I've been around for quite some time. So I was born and I grew up in Bhojpuri, Nepal. That's a district in East Nepal. That time it was very remote, no roads, no other connection. We basically had to trek for several days to reach there. And the closest town used to be Dharan. So I left Bhojpur maybe permanently when I was maybe about 17, 18. But I left Bhojpur when I was around 11 or 12, temporarily to go to school in Dharan. Some people used to go to one school in Yaku, and even from Bhojpur, the actual town of Bhojpur was about 1.5 days travel from the village.
Oh, wow.
So that was pretty remote. So then I went to public high school in Dharan. And then after finishing those days, it used to be grade 10, the school leaving certificate, SLC. After that, I went to Viratnagar because that was cheaper and easier to go. Was the Mahindra Mohan College, Viratnagar, IUC, which is like grade 12 these days. So then obviously I went to, I got in scholarship to go to Colombo in India, and then eventually to work in Nepal and other places, which we can go to as we discuss further, but that's the beginning.
Oh, wow. Incredible. Animalai, what is so special is, imagine हजुरको, beginnings were in such a remote part of Nepal, right? And now to think that हजुरको career is urban planning in the US, right? Kosto contrast. Like, do you reflect on that? It's an interesting sort of, journey.
Yeah, that's a very interesting observation. All the way from really remote places in Nepal to kind of urban planning and doing urban development in a very developed country. That's a pretty big leap. But during my time, almost anyone of kind of my age, within 10 years elder or 10 years younger to me, the trajectory was very similar because Nepal was poor. 99.9% of the people had difficulties basically making a living. And then a vast majority of the people those days were in hills and then they slowly begin to move to the plains. The plain was not as big populated as densely populated is right now because of the malaria and many other diseases. So most of the people that you encounter these days, you are a different generation, but the previous generation, the story that I have is not very peculiar. So I don't really have to take a lot of credit and claim because almost everyone went through the same tracks. But yes, that one, it's a big contrast.
Awesome. त्यो सोच्दाखेरि अम्बिकाजी, did you, what did you dream of पहिला भोजपुरमा and, through your journey in Viratnagar and so on? What did you want to be? Is what you are अहिले? Is that, close enough?
No, that's a good question. It's probably not close enough at all. It's not even close by any chance because I didn't even know what urban planning was at that time.
Right.
So during that time, the exposure in the hills was very limited in Bhojpur. Basically, what you listen to is maybe a couple hours of radio. Even that came along even late. But it used to be open only for a couple hours and only a few households used to have the radios. Apart from that, it was like word of mouth. It was very rural area. Some people came to Dharan to get salt and spices and clothes and those kind of things once in a while. But they had to go through a lot of hurdles. They had to cross the river on a boat, cross, Arun and many other smaller rivers, and stay in between many times and then come back. So the exposure in terms of what was happening in the world or the global situation was extremely limited. As a matter of fact, Priti, those days, I don't think there was a reach of the government in the village and the place that we used to have because there was basically nothing. There were no police, there were no courts, there were no medical places, there were no schools. So the only one small town was the Bhojpur Bazaar, which was very long distance from us, and that was basically a commercial center. And I think they had maybe a very small office, and it was so long ago that the government in Nepal did not have its reach all across the country. So you're basically on your own. And if a big thing happened, basically you resolve that in the village. And then if it is something that was like a murder or something, then eventually somebody walked to the small court, one or two people in Bhojpur. And then if it was big, then people, sometimes I used to hear people went to Kathmandu on 13 days walk. That was the only way to go there. So given all of that, I didn't really know much on what to think of the career or profession and all of that. But once I came to Dharan, and then a lot of teachers were from Bihar and UP, and then there were some of the teachers from the town. And then I got to see a life of a teacher because there was a lot of prestige and a reputation that you come across them on the street, you do namaste and sir. They were taken into a very high kind of position and they were trusted. So in the beginning, my aim was, in those days, the salary used to be, I think, for a teacher about 200 rupees a month. And Gorkha Patra is a paper that once in a while we used to get to see. And that used to be the salary. And I thought, wow, it would be a good life if I could become a math or science teacher and earn a salary of 200 rupees and be called the Saravnai across the street. That's as much as I could think. And actually, eventually, to come back to your question, I did remain in some sort of academy because as soon as I finished my Colombo Plan scholarship and my bachelor's degree in architecture and engineering in India, I came back and I taught at the Institute of Engineering in Lalitpur, in Pulchok, in Nepal. So I remained a teacher for a long time, maybe about 12, 15 years. And then I came here, and even then it's a combination of professionalism and academia. So I taught on the side at Arizona State University for almost 15 years. So in some ways that concept kind of remained, but the imagination that I had was entirely different.
It's amazing. As I listen to you, Kati Partha, it feels like I'm, watching a movie, right? In terms of it's incredible.
Watching it, stories movie.
It's incredible, and to be able to go through that journey and everything else you've seen and is definitely very, very interesting, Ambika. One thing, you talked a little bit in terms of, your move to to the US and so on. That I'm sure it wasn't as simple as you mentioned. That how was it? With all the Adhikary experience and so on, how was that transition to the US?
Thank you, Preeti. That's a very interesting question because the US or the Europe or any other foreign country used to be kind of in the dreams of many of us. The only places that I had seen was a few places in Nepal. And then when I went to Kathmandu, I was kind of awestruck because it was a big city from my perspective, right? And so from then, when I went to India, I went to Gujarat in a place called Baroda, a very nice place. And then spent 5 years of my really young age from about 17 to 22 or 18 to 23, somewhere around that age of mine. So obviously, it was very close to Mumbai and a couple other places. And those are kind of as big a thing as you can think of because that is the exposure that we had. And of course, India was a much bigger country, although it was very poor and then also very kind of backward in many senses because it had just become independent. People used to travel on bullock carts. There was some trains and some trucks and some vehicles, but very rudimentary. And life was pretty poor there too, although there was a system of education and culture of education much better than Nepal. So even then, there was some thought about the US by looking at the paper. But one exposure that I got in India was in Nepal, there were only very few people that I knew who had actually gone to the US and come back as a student. But in India, that I'm talking about, like mid-70s and late 70s, those days, there was this kind of trajectory of many of the engineers and medical people and scientists coming to the US and Europe. So it had just begun, that kind of journey had just begun. So then people used to talk about the graduate record exam, the test of English as a foreign language, applying to the university, of course, all that by snail mail. So that's something we used to hear when we went to the university, because those universities in India, of course, were kind of crafted in the image of the British university. After the British left, because they were there for more than 104 years, so there was a lot of really big impression and big footprint that they had lived in India. So I kind of knew, how big a deal it would be to go to places like US. And then some of their students who used to come back and say, okay, US is like that. So it was like a dream world for many people. There were no phones, there were no internets, very hard to see some black and white pictures here and there on the papers. But we did watch some Western movies like made in the US and in UK. So that gave some kind of glimpse of how the life was in the US. I remember some of it, but still you had to imagine how it is, right? So finally, when I got a chance to come to University of Hawaii, after having worked at the Institute of Engineering for about 4 years, it was definitely a big deal because very few people used to come. They used to give scholarship to very few people. It was very difficult to get any transaction to dollar. We didn't have money. My salary was 570 rupees a month and not a lot, right? And it was difficult for people to think of getting a visa, buying a ticket, having a dollar and going someplace. The only way that some people left was some institutional mechanism. The US government or the US foundation or the embassy would advertise some scholarship, just a few, usually just to be like 3, 4, or 5 per year. And then people would apply, and then if you got it, they would organize everything, then you came. So obviously it was a really big difference between Nepal or any other country. Even when I first went to Thailand, for example, on the way to the US, I saw the escalator at the airport. It was a big deal, right? Then I went to Hong Kong, stopped over for a few days. It was entirely a different world. Went to Japan on my way to come to Hawaii for a few days. And then so, those are all kind of one of a kind, the first exposure to the new world. And then when I came to Hawaii, it was a big difference between Nepal and Hawaii. And Hawaii, even otherwise, is a very beautiful place. So I was awestruck. So the journey was great. But that time there were so few people, and then we had a job. And culturally, it was very difficult to kind of think of settling outside. And parents were getting older, so there were lots of those cultural nuances. And with a good education, life was not too bad in Nepal. Of course, not comparable to the US, but I was doing pretty well. So I went back. So that was my first the US exposure. But to continue to ask what you were kind of implying, the differences, I ended up coming to the US several times and going back several times. So then I went back and then I worked in Nepal for about 4 5 years in Pokhara, Fulsok, and the rest of the country. Then eventually I came again to Boston to do my initial program at MIT and then eventually to do my doctoral program at the Graduate School of Design at Harvard. So that was the second time. Then, of course, by that time I knew a little better, but I still had a job. Eventually I went back again. I was kind of nowhere for a long time. And then I went back again and then lived in Nepal for about 5 years. I headed the International Union for Conservation of Nature. That was an international Swiss-based organization and traveled within Nepal and across Asia and all that. So that's what kind of kept me kind of nomad in a pendulum between US and Nepal. But finally, I decided to move the permanent in 2001. So that's a long story.
Incredible. Ambika ji, I mean, I've obviously heard a little bit about your wonderful moves and so on. And one thing that, well, at personal level, the interesting laga is exactly this as well, right? Because there's obviously oily coal generation, but there's a big chunk of people that come to the US or Australia or UK for higher studies. A segment of that actually go back. There aren't a lot of people that do this moving back and forth. My after life, I moved back to Nepal twice. So I sort of understand the nuances. And I think, with aging parents and so on, we have a lot of things that pull us back. One question I have for you is, but now you have seen your 60s, 70s, taking go Nepal, and you've moved back several times, back and forth also, because what also happens is, when we think about our diaspora, they come here, they finish their study, they settle here, or even if they go back, it's after a few years, but most people try to, go frequently. There is this gap, right? So, it's been back and forth pretty frequently, जस्तो खालको. त्यो सोच्दाखेरि, the version of Nepal you experienced as a child, as a young person, and you've gone over time. त्यो हेर्दाखेरि हजुरलाई, how has that evolution been, जस्तो लाग्छ?
That's a very good question, Pritiji, because we are all kind of prisoners of our own experience, right? And then we are also kind of evolutionary creatures based on certain routes and the way that we travel and sometimes become nomads, sometimes settle in different places. Because even within Nepal, people from my generation begin to move from the hills to the plains, a little more comfort and a little more better economy. And then many people who had slightly better education even moved to Kathmandu and settled, which was a different world by any means. So all those things had changed, but a long time ago, the contrast between, let's say, a Nepali village and Nepali urban area, and then Nepal and big cities in India, and Nepal, India, or the US or Europe, was like a dramatic difference. It was like some of my friends used to say in the engineering institute before I had seen Europe and America, they used to say that, hey, if you go there, you'll get actually a big cultural shock, because in terms of not just the anthropological human culture, but in terms of the way that things are done, the cleanliness, the equality, the efficiency, the development, all of that will kind of really shock you big time. That's what they used to tell me, because that was the kind of really big difference. There was a lot of development and consolidation and science and technology in Europe and the US or North America or Japan. And Nepal was, at $150 a year per capita. 99% of people were like me, undernourished, no good opportunities for education, basically maybe 1 or 2 pairs of clothes in the whole entire year if you're lucky. And if you're lucky, then you had maybe close to 70-80% of your calorie intake guaranteed to you, because there was a lot of hunger and there was a lot of issues. So there was a really big contrast. So when I first time I left Nepal and saw the rest of the world, it was sky and earth, right? So these days, and then of course I've been going to Nepal very frequently. And even when I worked here, I went there every year or two. Now there's a lot of convergence in terms of the comforts, in terms of the things that you see, whether it is an iPhone or whether it is the home that you live, the indoor plumbing, whether it is driving a motorbike or a car, or even flying some places, or even the quality of the roads, even the kind of food that you can basically manage to eat, go to restaurant, or buy clothes. It's kind of globalized, and also, relatively speaking, Nepal also has improved economically. There's a lot of middle class people. And especially if you go to some big cities in India, which I went back to the place that I studied a couple of times, there is a big convergence between here and there. There might be some differences institutionally, but in terms of many things, whether it is a shopping mall or the TV or the computing, or people having a really good education or fashion or clothes or whatever, there's not much difference. So the interesting thing is what we have seen in our lifetime. Of course, your generation saw a lot of things already when we were young, but in our lifetime, maybe the average per capita income was less than $100 per year globally. Now the average global per capita income is about 15,000 US dollar per year globally. There are countries like Nepal, which is not too bad, about $1,200 per capita now. But there are some countries in Africa which are like still $250, $300, $400 per year. There are very few. And then many other countries have really caught up. And in terms of the economy and comfort and benefit, then being able to go to school, in terms of the literacy rate, in terms of the life expectancy, in terms of the childhood mortality, in terms of having a bike or a car or a motorbike, having enough 1,800, 2,000 calories per day to be able to eat, and having, a couple pairs of clothes, or even taking some vacation. The vast majority of the world has kind of converged into a lot more development and comfort.
No, that's very interesting, and I want to kind of come back to that because there's this thing that I found very interesting, होइन? जस्तो हजुरको केसमा चाहिँ, and again it's a rare thing that I see is your LinkedIn title and what what your passion project भन्ने कि something that you very well known for are completely different things. And धेरै मान्छेको त्यो त्यस्तो balance भन्ने कि त्यस्तो खालको two parallel successful things and that are अलिकति separate पनि त्यस्तो हुँदैन है. So just want to explore a little bit in terms of that. But we've heard about हजुरको professional accomplishments. Tell us about this passion project and how it has a life of its own.
Well, thank you, Preeti. Yeah, so it does appear a few kind of, I work in Diaspora, I work in development, and by training, I'm an architect, and then eventually got a PhD in urban planning. But if I had to professionally define myself, there will be basically three terminologies that I will use. So I'm a planner, but within planning is like a jack of all trades, right? It really suits my personality. You can do many things in planning. People come from design background, people come from engineering background, people come from economics background, anthropology, geography, sociology, a lot of things people come from. You're still a planner. And so that's my kind of training and profession is design and planning. So that's one. That's the kind of my day job most of the time. But I'm also international development professional for a long time. Within planning, within design, within energy, within environment, I worked on international development for a long time also. So that's why I traveled to so many countries. I worked in countries like Kenya or Tanzania or India or Fiji. Kenya alone, probably 5-6 visits, and I was training at the university. I was working with the government. Same thing with Fiji, and same thing in many other countries, including places like Abu Dhabi, including places like Mexico. I worked a lot with the World Bank. So a lot of work in Pakistan, a lot of work in even Thailand, Korea. So all of that, there's also a passion for me in development internationally. Anytime that I go to a new place, I see, hey, what are these guys doing? So then I went to Fiji and I saw that their per capita income is like six, seven, eight, $9,000 per capita per year. That's a pretty decent income. It's like a higher per income country, right? And then I begin to see, well, it's a small country, less than 1 million people. What do they do? I try to talk to people and I make some observation and I compare. Of course, I've got a base of Nepal, right? And then I see, well, they have a very high upscale tourism. They sell their hotels from anywhere between $200 to $1,000. They've got world-class resorts. Lots of people come and spend a lot of money. And then, of course, they export. So tourism is a really big deal. And then they export really high-value products in terms of agriculture. They are not like a manufacturing economy. They're still agrarian. And by the way, there's something like 7,000 Nepalese who do a lot of this agriculture. They've been there like last 150 years in Fiji. And it was amazing for me to go to their village. And they still call you Daju and they have kukuri and, all that. So then they have like things like papaya and mango and pineapple and some lychees, a lot of things that in developed countries, close to them is New Zealand and Australia and then of course America and so on, is very high value fruits. And so they make big money from those perspectives. Then even for such a small country, they've got 10 universities, 850,000 people in 10 universities. The University of South Pacific has something like 46,000 students. A lot of them are international students. Even they were Nepalese students. So I used to go and provide some lectures. And so they've learned some of the things from the Australian counterparts that you can use your education as export to the people in their brain. So they've got a few things right out there. And then so they have a pretty good standard of living. It's an upper middle income country and life is very good. And same thing. I began to going to places like Kenya since 2006. So when I was a student in Nepal, it was a lot of rote learning. So we used to learn about Africa as a dark continent, then about the diseases, about lots of problems, the kind of wild animals problems in terms of eating, manufacturing, and technology. And then so just one country I focused, 6 travels from 2006 to 2016 with the same group of people. Within that time, their per capita kind of went up by 75%. Okay. Still a lot of corruption, still a lot of problem, but no way that the way that I was thinking about Africa is entirely different. You go to this Nairobi, it's like Mumbai or downtown Phoenix. You go to Dar es Salaam, it's like some part of it is like downtown Phoenix. A lot of development and a lot of really orientation towards how they want to really increase the per capita income. So my second kind of identity is in international development, and I try to do that in Nepal also. And then my third is academia, right? I like to teach, I like to learn every time that I go to lecture. So even at University of Mexico, for example, when I used to go to Mexico, they used to invite me for talks. When I went to Chile, they used to invite me for talks. So all of these kinds of things that I have done. I've taught at Strathmore University in Kenya. So those 3 things sometimes I combine. So when you see things like diaspora in development, when you see how diaspora can really support development in their native countries. By the way, Africa has one of the really amazing work by the diaspora that you probably know it because you are in this field. Some of the countries are way advanced than even like us and India or even Pakistan. They even have, some of them have even represented in the parliament in places like Senegal from the diaspora. So those 3 things are not too different for me. And just because in the urban planning, there's a lot of like social science, a little bit of economics, a little bit of sociology. So what you see in me is kind of jack of all trades, kind of a little multidisciplinary type of interest. It could be, when you look at it, it could be a little kind of confusing, but that's what I did.
I think now that you've explained it, I think it makes sense. They're all connected in terms of physical interest and your lived experiences across everything. एउटा चाहिँ मैले I want to kind of share a little bit in terms of the first time I actually heard about you, Ambika ji. त्यो चाहिँ कहिले थियो भने after starting TVND, and very soon we started the Diaspora mapping survey. We felt a need that the up-to-date information about our diaspora was missing and so on. So त्यो गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ I think the first paper that we actually read as a group to get started was हजुरको in terms of the work you've done on diaspora and so on, which was a really great starting point, and it gave us a lot of insights and so on. Through the TGND ko tarfबाट पनि we're obviously working on that as well. What I'd love to ask you is, you've been doing this research for a while, right? And you understand the need and so on. I'd love for you to explain to our audience why they should be a part of something like this. A diaspora mapping survey. What is it? Why should I put this information? And you're the perfect person, I think, the perfect ambassador to talk about it. So I'd love for you to share it with our audience.
Thank you for that question. That is definitely, that's one of the passions that I definitely have. Partly because the reason that I had my feet in two boats for such a long time was cultural, my own kind of sense of insecurity, my own sense of identity, and my own sense of a little bit of a romanticism of working in. So especially having been involved in the people's movement in 1990, I was a student here, but even from here, we did contribute a lot of things in terms of making protests, going to White House, the Capitol, writing papers, calling people, trying to support the new democracy coming in Nepal in 1990. I was young at that time. So that I had some interest with a good education, luckily, that going back to Nepal and, something like what Sorin Morley is doing right now. In my age, at least, he's a very smart guy, but in my years, I also had some sparks like that a little bit, right, in the previous generation. So working in the actual development sector in Nepal, doing roads, talking to people, thinking about anthropology, thinking about some increase in the standard of living of Nepalese people, improving the education system in Nepal. Those kind of things used to kind of romanticize me. And I know I like it here. It's a good country here. Downsides in America, but by and large, you make a good living, you get a job, and you can work, and you can be pretty comfortable. But because I was so much plugged in, because I came from the village and I had walked bare feet, and I knew the system out there, and went to public schools, went to even similar school in India, taught at government university in Nepal. So my interest was kind of see people, everyone who doesn't have a lot of initial benefit, like coming from a big city and having rich parents, they should all have that kind of opportunity. So that was one of my motivations. Young people have some idealism, and I have some of that. Now, Nepal definitely gave me a lot of prestige, identity, and sense of belonging. We all do things that really suit us in the long run, right? At the end, it has to work for you. So that's what was working for me. And that's what, even after having residency here in North America, I went back. So that is one thing that when I lived here, I was kind of missing a little bit of that. So once I found a community, and then of course through a diaspora, at least there's a platform that you are linked, even if you don't live in Nepal and you're not completely part of the Nepalese society, but in terms of its development equation, you can become a really significant part and you can do something. So there was one motivation of kind of working on it. So you will see that although kind of in terms of journal publication, there are only a few, but I had done a lot of organizations of diaspora meetings and put some books and booklets out of that. The first one I did was long time ago at the University of Toronto in 1993. I think that was the largest, first really high-level international conference of the Nepali diaspora. Something like 100 attendees, ministers from Nepal, the vice chairman from planning commission from Nepal, ambassadors, or lots of people from the World Bank, and all of that. We organized with a little bit of support from the Canadian government, and we actually published a book called The Economic Strategy for Nepal. So that was one of the first, and that kind of gave me that connection of what I had always wanted to do. So that is one. And the second one is now we live here, children are here, right? And the second generation is here. It's very difficult for them to go back. Very few, some people will go back, maybe for a short period of time, but by and large, their life is going to be wherever they are, just because we brought them here. And how do we actually connect? And how do we think of all the welfare of that particular diaspora who's still straddling between the two cultures, right? At least several generations you straddle the two cultures. And how do you do that? One way is to organize the diaspora, think about it like you're doing a great work in terms of entrepreneurship and all that. So that really kind of helps us build our own capacity, not only for the benefit of Nepal, but if we are not able to stand on our own feet, and if we do not really understand the strength and weaknesses that we have, there's not much we can do. Also, what you cannot measure, you cannot manage. Yeah.
No, I so get that. तर मलाई यसमा एउटा क्वेसन सोध्नु मन लाग्छ चाहिँ अम्बिकाजी होइन जस्तो we talk about different generations of Nepalis over time and so on. But one thing you talked about is that mixed भन्दा the बिचतिरको generation, people like us that always have this thing, right? And I always joke with my friends that this is the new midlife crisis, and I've sort of talked about it a little bit. I know where even the generation back, but a lot of us, struggle with this decision whether they should be in Nepal. Especially, I think alikiti settled, once people are alikiti successful, they always have this push. I know, aging family, all of it. There's this all of it. If you were to just, give somebody advice in terms of that, what would that be? Somebody's, maybe that sort of generation, middle generation, so that is struggling with that decision. And I would love your context of how you've seen Nepal changes, and, US go and both go move. If somebody comes to you and says, Ambika ji, I'm thinking about going back to Nepal, what is your advice?
Well, it's a difficult thing to offer advice for people on what to do with their life. But still, we can entertain that question and see some hypothetical scenarios.
Okay.
People have to definitely craft and carve out their own trajectory, their own journey, their own interest. And obviously, you got to do what you like, because there's democracy in Nepal, there's democracy here. So it's your life. And there's no feeling of guilt, although there's sometimes some of us feel a little guilty of having left Nepal and not contributed, but that's a personal thing. But there's no reason to feel like that. It's okay. It's your life. You do what you want to do. People have moved around. And to simplify, people have moved around not only among countries, but inside the country itself. So from my village, I moved to a town, then eventually to Kathmandu. There was also, I've got some obligation to the village also, right? So, first of all, movement is pretty normal. This is our evolutionary process. We go where life is better, there's a better quality for your kids. And then also in terms of your own education, where you can really utilize it to the max. So that's number one. Number two is obviously there's some hidden love or connection with Nepal. And it's not only for Nepal, for any country. You talk to people from places like Japan or Korea, even more developed countries, they would have the same kind of provincial connectivity to where they're from, right? And even if they come from a poorer country, it's still the same thing. Even if you go to India, which is like 80% similar culture, you connect with the Nepalese, and the Nepalese will feel more comfortable with kind of the Nepali thing. So it's only natural phenomenon. The evolution of human beings is somewhat tribal. We are always kind of tribal, but in terms of That's fine anthropologically, but obviously we got to go beyond that when we live in a society and become a little more secular and accept everyone and also be open-minded. That's a civilizational thing. But in terms of intuition, in terms of our evolution, in terms of our genes, uh, all animals are kind of tribal, and so are human beings. Uh, Before the agricultural revolution, obviously it used to be a very small tribe of 150, 200 people banding together and doing the hunting and gathering. And then when people settled, maybe about 11,000 years ago, it's the agriculture permanently home. Obviously, people didn't have an opportunity to travel to vast distances. They will settle. So for like 8 generations, my family came from Makwanpur. Prior to that in Jumla, prior to that in Kardali also, hundreds of generations in Nepal. But the last 9 generation was in Bhojpur. We were just in 1 or 2 villages, right? And then so that's how we knew each other. The marriages used to be within the walking distance, at the most a couple hours. So this is how people kind of manage their life. Otherwise, it was too difficult. It was not like today where there's a global connectivity through Facebook and all that. So all of that comes into our kind of genes, and it's perfectly okay to be connected to Nepal. And even if you live here, listen to Narayan Gopal's song or enjoy Gundruk and Bhat sometimes. That's what we are. Initially, the kind of taste that gets developed in your taste bud remains throughout your life, because majority of your personality and many things are basically formed within the first 5 years of your life, that the scientists say. So we are where we started from there, and then we nurture ourselves and we learn, and then we move along. So not really an advice, do what you want to do, try to do the best for yourself. But if you want to do something in Nepal, first of all, be in a strong position yourself, stand on your own feet, right? Have a job or have a good credential, even if you want to go back to Nepal, that you can really utilize that. Just don't be kind of half-baked, midstream, and then say, I want to go to Nepal and do something. There are a lot of smart people in Nepal. Education is pretty amazing in Nepal. 22 medical colleges, 12 universities, 60 engineering colleges, hundreds, tens of thousands of PhDs and medicals and all of that. So sometimes people kind of assume from here that even if they get a master's degree from somewhere in Canada or Australia or US, they say, oh, now I can tell what to do. To the Nepalese people, no, don't be carried away with that kind of thing. So prepare yourself, and if you think you can contribute something, then find out a way to either do it from here, or if you really want to make your feet wait and go to Nepal, all the power to you.
No, I like that. People definitely need a plan. I do believe that. I think, sometimes our emotions take over, and, your planning is better anyways, right? When you have a plan A, B, C, it always helps. To sort of, talk more in terms of that last point you mentioned, right? What if you choose not to go? How can people contribute to the diaspora wherever they are, or to Nepal? What's a way that you're seeing more and more?
So Preeti, one of the first things I think we need to do now, I call it a diaspora in the making. I call the Nepalese diaspora as a diaspora in the making, because we still are not that mature or not that strong. And unlike Chinese, Indian, and some other diaspora, which are also called the old diaspora, we are brand new kid in the block. So our rise has been very rapid in terms of number, education, and the potential. We need a lot of homework among ourselves in terms of our capacity mapping, in terms of organizations, in terms of training, in terms of really knowing, having the information and having the knowledge. So this is one of that small contribution that I try to make whenever I have. I belong to Association of Nepalese in America. That's actually the oldest Nepalese association here in the US and Canada. And so every time there's a meeting, by the way, the next one is in Denver, Colorado, July 1st weekend. We usually do a Nepal forum, and then I usually kind of organize something about diaspora, and then also publish all the proceedings. because that's one way that you can connect a lot of people that come to diaspora and then understand their own strength. So I would advise that.
So I think that's a great point, and we also encourage, I think, our community members to be more involved. I think that, and to figure out ways to contribute back to Nepal or the diaspora. I think that's important. So thank you for that. One quick thing I wanted to kind of ask you is, Hazuli, you talked about, you shared a little bit about all these different countries you've actually been monitoring, right? Japan, they can Kenya, they can all these places. And we also talked a little bit in terms of, kune countries, let's say they use education as an export, all of that. अहिले आएर सोच्दाखेरि, when you think about 2023 and Nepal, what is the one thing that Nepal could export? What is Nepalको brand, currently?
Oh, so that's wonderful. We really need to think from that perspective. That's a very good thinking, Pritizi. Our typical brand so far has been a little bit of exoticism, natural landscape and beauty, and maybe a little bit of anthropological and cultural kind of richness and resources. You can only go so far with that. That's good for tourism. Our natural landscape is, of course, spectacular. There are very few places that can really surpass the beauty of Nepal. And the cultural landscape is also pretty impressive in Nepal. And the old culture, oldest country in South Asia, and lots of really good practices, diversity, music, dance, the way that we do things. All that is very important in terms of promoting tourism and bringing back some dollars, and then also creating jobs. But that's only one thing that Nepal can offer. Let's say like Fiji, only 850,000 people, 160 islands. They have lots of other limitations. So they do the best that they can do from whatever they're doing. This is like Kenya, of course, is 50% more than our population. There's something like 45, 46 million people. It's a big country, a lot of resources again in terms of hydro, tea, flowers, all kinds of things. So they do manufacturing, they do tea, they do flour, they do tourism, like all these animal safaris. But this is like Tanzania also do education for Pan-Africa. They've got world-class universities where they hire teachers from India and many other places and have students like University of Dodoma had students from all over Africa. So Nepal it's a small country compared to our two neighbors, India and China. Both of them are almost 50 times as big as we are. But in the scheme of things, out of the 193 or say around 200 countries, we are reasonable size. We're probably 35th in population and maybe 40 in terms of area. So we are a mid-sized country. We can become a middle power if we had a really good income. 30 million is great. Places like Netherlands have 16 million people. Sweden has 8-9 million people. Netherlands and Norway has 3, 4, 5 million people, and Singapore has 5 million. New Zealand has 5 million. All of them punch big weight in the system. So it's just that we don't have a good economy. Almost 30 million people. So the climate is one factor that we can use for, like, let's say medical tourism or other healing, therapeutical garden type of things. So tourism is given. We definitely need to continue with that, but that's only one part. Tourism only can help so much. And we are not really a high value tourist country like I was mentioning, like France. A population of 65 million people, now they get more than 100 million people, visitors every year. And then it's high income tourism. You go to any place like Eiffel Tower, for a family, you will be spitting out $250 easily for tickets, 3 or 4 tickets. So we can think of medical tourism. There are lots of with 22 medical schools which have been recognized by WHO. All these doctors come to US, Canada, Australia. They do very well. They're very well trained. So medical facilities could be really amazing in Nepal. That's one. But if you look at any country's initial trajectories, from agriculture to service economy is very rare. It doesn't really happen. We always go through some kind of assembly or manufacturing. That is China, that's Singapore, that's Vietnam, that's Malaysia, that's Taiwan, that's every country, that's India. So one thing that we have really not done is we import so many, let's say, cars and iPhones and motorbikes and so on. One of my economist friends was telling me that, hey, just like many other countries, we should only allow to import them 80% of those parts or the content. 20 or 25% should be made in Nepal. And because there's such a big market in Nepal imports like 100,000 cars a year. They will set up a factory in Nepal to put something that we can easily make, like a tailpipe, or one of the hoods, or so many things that we can make. So manufacturing, some type of manufacturing, including agricultural processing, manufacturing of some of the basic things that have been very well organized, like cars and motorbikes and bikes, at least a part of it in Nepal with a factory with Indian or other factories. That would be another thing that even people like Shorty Warrior sometimes talk about. I think that's something that's missing from the dialogue. But what we do, we always think of some academic level of economy building, but we don't really go to the grassroots of that. So education definitely is another one, at least on South Asia with a really nice climate. You know how people used to go to Simla and Darjeeling and Mount Abu in India and many other nice hill stations for education in India. Even some of the really good schools don't school like in Dehradun. Even within the country, people wanted to send their kids to a really good climate place. And so Nepal, very large portion of Nepal, I always think that every time you drive in Nepal, every point is a viewpoint. You know how you drive around here, they say there will be a viewpoint after some time in Nepal, every point is a viewpoint, right? So that's another thing that we can really do, but obviously we need to kind of boost up the quality. I think we are working in a little bit. Medical college had some students from India, Sri Lanka, and outside, and Bhutan, and a few other places. But we sent a lot of students, a lot of money outside. Even this year, there are 170,000 no objection certificate given to students, 50,000 alone to Australia. And in average, one person going to Australia needs at least about 50,000 Australian dollars. That's a lot of money, and some universities in Australia are really good. And of course, some people want to go there and have a permanent residency, but some people want to go just for education. Now, the only out of the 50 universities in Australia, 10 are really good world class. Many others, Nepal can definitely create those kind of universities right there in Nepal, not only for the Nepalese, but in many other countries. So we've got to think laterally on many of these opportunities, I think, Priti.
No, I agree, Ambika ji. And I think त्यो कति कुरामा चाहिँ there's so many things that there is a potential for that maybe we need a little bit more alignment with policy. Maybe we need a little bit more marketing. It's those kind of things, right? It's a mixed bag of these kind of things.
Yeah, exactly.
I know. Interesting. One thing from our conversation, I definitely feel like Fiji and Dico, we should create a chapter for sure. I think that there's a good presence there. I've heard of few economists and so on that are there as well. There are one thing that I'd sort of like to close our episode with, because he is, you've obviously seen a lot, done a lot, Nepal, all over the world and so on, right? And my question got two parts. So one is, when you first came to the US on the 70s, and throughout, Aideko Samako journey, how has your आफ्नो perception of being a Nepali, how has that sort of evolved, if it has? On the other side, how has the perception of non-Nepalis that interacted with you when you came as a student taking oiling, do you see that shifting?
Good, Priti. So in terms of my own kind of identity and perceptions and who I am about Nepaliness, obviously much doesn't change when you come here in the mid-age. If you come very young, immediately after high school, that's different, but I came for graduate school. Because when I first came here, I was almost like 45, 46. So my basic personality and my identity and many of my likings and dislikes were completely formed. So I'm pretty much kind of what I am. Obviously, we learned a little bit here and there, but your core basically is already predefined, right? But in terms of how we get along and the perception that we encounter with the non-Nepalese, like the other Americans or other international personality, is initially when you come as a student, and obviously it's also your own psychology, at least in my time, always wanted to go back and did most of the things about Nepal. So it was kind of an idea of temporary living in the years. As exciting, as nice as it was, that was my kind of psychology. Now I have come here, lived here permanently, becoming older, have health issues, have kids, have grandkids, have friends, families. So with all of that, we know that even if I go back to Nepal as a retiree, it will only be half time at the most or something like that, right? So the psychology has somewhat kind of different. So you care more about what's going on here, what is the politics here, because that's what impacts you on a day-to-day basis. Because if something happens, you're going to call 911. It's the fire brigade and it's your police department that has to work, rather than something that's happening in our India. So our connection to Nepal is that emotional connection. And we do definitely want to contribute whatever we can, do things from our side. But if we live here permanently, our life belongs here. So my psychology somewhat kind of changes a little bit. And based on that, you interact with the people at work and professional societies also somewhat change it, because you have more stick with the place that you live. And you also have a lot of psychological stakes in Nepal. So for example, even during the by-election in Nepal, I was not sleeping, right? When there's the election here also, I'm not sleeping. So with Nepali, we also get to enjoy twice the enjoyment. We have 2 New Years, Dasai, Tihar,
2 birthdays,
Christmas, and everything.
Mother's Day.
But we also have the 2 other, twice the kind of stress that we carry. But we want to do things in Nepal. When no one was updating, I was sending friends, people, every 200 words on what was happening, right? And then same thing we do here. So the other thing that I would add, Priti, is as I become a little older, hopefully a little wiser, then obviously you also get your own a little bit of recognition on where you live. So for example, I've lived here this is the longest I've lived in any one place. Even in Nepal, I was in Kathmandu or Karan, Viratnagar or Bhojpur. At the most, I lived in Kathmandu maybe 12, 13 years. But here now I have been 20 years in one place in India. So having worked as a planner and having taught at the university and having gone to many of these seminars and many of the American Planning Association regular talks and so on, there is some credibility and some reputation that you bring, right? So people know me a little bit in terms of regionally, my small planning field that Ambika does this kind of work, international development. He knows how to do high-rise rezoning, and he knows how to do, because I'm also doing how to do. So those things also really help. Then you get plugged in and get connected, and then you kind of become very happy with that kind of reputation.
Right.
We had that in Nepal. It takes a lot of time to build it here because it's very competitive.
Of course. No, of course. I love that, Ambika ji. I feel like, you are definitely so wise. You have this wealth of knowledge in everything. And, I feel like we could chat forever. But, I think, you have obligations as well. And, we do need to cap this, especially for this episode. So we'll sort of, wrap it up. But thank you so much, Ambika ji. There is so much. I mean, like I said, I've been so inspired by what you've done, but what you continue to do with the diaspora and how you continue to inspire us. So thank you so much for being here.
You're very welcome, and thank you so much, Priti, for having. I really appreciate it and enjoyed it.